Chris has 16 years of administrative and compliance experience working with Non-Community Unit out of the St. Paul office. Paul has 26 years experience working as a sanitarian out of the Bemidji office. Both have been very active in working towards a smooth transition into the RTCR. Please help me welcome Chris and Paul. Thank you. And it's a small group. It's however you talked about earlier. If you want to do minute and questions and answers, we'll leave the door open, and I'll see if there's anybody you guys can.
Maybe with a smaller group, we should maybe just entertain questions as they come up.
Yep, that would be.
I think that'd be fine. We just don't want to run overtime.
Well, thank you and welcome everyone. Thanks for having us here, having the opportunity to discuss some upcoming regulations in the Safe Drinking Water Act, a regulation that oversees all of the public water supplies throughout Minnesota. And with this group, if you have questions as they come up, please feel free to ask. And then also Paul and I will be available at the Vendor Expo this afternoon, so we'll take any questions that you have at that time too. So what I'm going to do is I'll provide just a quick introduction of the rule, the background, why there's some changes going on, what are some of the key changes, and then transfer it over to Paul, and then he will focus on what some of the impacts that will be impacting your a seasonal public water system, and then also as owners and operators of the systems, how you can better prepare for the rule. With the RTCR, it's under the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act, one of its primary goals is to be sure that public water drinking water systems are free of disease-causing organisms. And this is a federal regulation, and in Minnesota, it's the Department of Health that has the primacy to actually regulate that throughout Minnesota. Since 1989, the rule that's been in place is called the Total Coliform Rule, and that focuses more on water system testing and then actions to correct if any of the microbes are found in the water system. And over a number of years, the EPA has been working to revise the Total Coliform Rule, and they were finalized in 2013 and will go into effect April 1st of next year, 2016. And the RTCR shifts the focus a little bit away from strictly monitoring and takes more of a risk-based approach overall. And the purpose of the RTCR is to look for and try to reduce any potential pathways where fecal contamination can get into the system. It's more what they call like a find and fix approach. So instead of monitoring to see if contamination has gotten into the system, the goal is to look for potential ways that contamination could be getting in and correct that before there's a problem. And the testing would be total coliform, which is an indicator for the system operation and condition, and E. coli is an indicator that fecal contamination is getting into the system. And of course, that's much more of an imminent health risk that needs to be addressed. Some of the key provisions of the RTCR is that it does apply to all public water supplies throughout the state, from the very small, rural churches that are on their own well to small resorts, all the way up to large municipal water systems. And as we transition into the new rule, everybody will maintain the current monitoring schedule as long as it continues to be a well-run system, it will begin on the current monitoring schedule. And for most of you, I would imagine that that's annual monitoring, where our staff comes out and collects a water sample once per year. Is there anybody here that's collecting their own water samples? Okay, so then that will continue into next year. And another provision of the rule is that it does maintain a maximum contaminant level for E. coli. Again, that's the serious health risk that we don't want in the system. But with a total coliform, if that is found, the MCL, what they call maximum contaminant level, is replaced with a focused assessment. And so just some new terminology that you might be hearing is level 1 or level 2 assessments. And basically those are investigations that are conducted by MDH or the local program staff when they come out and if there's been total coliform or E. coli detected in your water system. And we'll be looking for sanitary defects and again, as I mentioned, systems will still be eligible to maintain a reduced annual monitoring schedule. However, there's under the new rule, there are more things that could place you on a monthly monitoring. But for well-run systems that don't have any contamination, those are likely to remain on the reduced monitoring. And then, as I mentioned, there are some new requirements that pertain specifically to seasonal water systems, and at that time it's the water systems that fully depressurize their entire distribution systems, and that's what Paul will be talking about here shortly.
Is that just the well, or is that the, how much of a depressurization is it?
It'd be if you fully depressurize your system.
Okay, so what if parts of the system were depressurized or isolated?
Right, at this time, those won't be required to perform these extra additions. However, it's always, we'll continue to recommend that anytime you have parts of your distribution system that depressurize, that you follow the same procedures that Paul will be going over today, just because of the risk that's there to introduce contamination when you drain the system and start it back up. And again, just avoiding the contamination to hopefully, so you maintain the annual monitoring schedule. I think that's the goal, is to have a system free of contamination and defects. So again, as I mentioned, the RTCR takes more of an investigative, monitoring and investigative approach. And so when total coliform or E. coli is detected in the water system, the MDH staff or the local program staff will come out to look to see how that potentially got into the system. And although this was formalized under the new rule, this is something that we've already been doing, so you really, there's no change in what you'll expect, from us, that we will still come out and we'll do the investigation. Under the new rule, everything is just a little bit more formalized with that. And what they call a level 1 assessment is when you have a total coliform detection in your water system, and it's just basic examination of your water system, looking at the well, the treatment, seeing if there's any issues there, looking through the distribution system for potential cross connections, or if there's been any changes in the system maintenance, or perhaps there was a heavy rain event or something that possibly caused contamination into the system. And then looking at the history of the water quality data, see if this has been an intermittent problem or if it's the first time it's ever been detected in your system. And then also we look at, it could be specific to the sampling site, or and so those are the issues that we will be looking at with total coliform. And what they call a level 2 assessment is conducted if E. coli is detected in the system, or if you've had 2 consecutive total coliform. So if you had a total coliform investigation the previous year, and then if we come out to collect our annual water sample and it's positive again, that will trigger us to look more in depth, because there's obviously something going on that maybe wasn't detected before. Somehow contamination is still getting into the system. So just because of the increased risk, obviously with E. coli or 2 consecutive total coliform positives, it's still looking at the same components, but much more in depth. We might ask more questions. We might we might look at the well closer, possibly have the well cambered or something if there's something going on that we just can't visually detect. And what's important to note is that if you do have E. coli in your system, or the 2 consecutive total coliform positives, that it would place your system then onto monthly monitoring frequency. So that's something to be aware of, that again, the focus is on looking for the defects and fixing them before there's a problem. So that's important to keep in mind. And then a sanitary defect is anything that could provide a pathway for microbial contamination into the water system, or it could be something that's indicative of a failure of a barrier that's in place. For example, if your system were to be chlorinating, if there was issues with the chlorination, that's breakdown of the barrier that's preventing that contamination. And some of the sanitary defects, we've come up with a specific list just so public water supply, their owners and operators know what specifically we'll be looking for. And so things like missing well cap, damaged or defective well casing, the seal between if you have a concrete slab around the well, if you have a hand pump, say at a campground, the openings in the pump base that lead right into the well casing, looking for that the wiring for your submersible pump is properly enclosed in conduit, and also that we wouldn't want the use of a flooded well. Also, if you have any finished water storage tanks, non-pressurized storage tanks, make sure that there's no unprotected openings, and then also cross connections in the distribution system with your treatment. And then also, again, if you were chlorinating, that the proper chlorine residual is being maintained. And if any of these defects are found, we will be looking for them if there's a total coliform positive or E. coli. We also will be starting to look for them at our annual site visit. Every year we'll be looking for these. We won't, that will be a little bit different because previously we maybe have just come to collect the water samples and maybe take a quick look around, but we'll be looking a little bit closer when we come out just on our annual basis. And then of course we always look at these when we're doing the sanitary survey as well. And so if they're found, in any of the cases, they must be corrected. If they're found during an assessment with a total coliform positive, must be corrected within 30 days or another timeline that's been approved by the Department of Health. So there will want to be that communication with your sanitarian. If there's a problem, say with the well casing and it can't be fixed within 30 days, that we have a timeline in place of when those changes are expected. If a defect is left uncorrected, it potentially would then be a violation that could place your system on monthly monitoring. So again, the goal is to get those corrected. And then if the defects are found in an annual site visit or a sanitary survey, they also must be corrected for you to maintain the annual monitoring. So again, the goal is just to get any of those defects in the water system corrected as soon as possible. And again, systems like yours will continue to be eligible for reduced monitoring, but just a quick review of some things that could make that so you're not eligible for the reduced monitoring would be if these coli is detected in the system, if you have the 2 total coliforms in 2 consecutive years, also if any sanitary defects are left uncorrected, and also that the MDH or the local program conducts an annual site visit, and also that each distribution system is sampled annually by the Department of Health or the local program staff. And this last point is important if you have say a resort where you have multiple wells and multiple distribution systems. There might be some that stay on longer or on year-round, whereas say cabins 1 through 5, you might blow out those lines and shut down that well earlier in the season. Specifically if you close it down earlier than you normally do, but if you're planning to close it down and we haven't been there yet, or the samples haven't been collected yet from that distribution system, it would be important to place call to the sanitarian so they can come out before you shut that down, so that annual sample can be collected again, because that's ultimately necessary so you can maintain the annual monitoring. So, and then with that, I will turn this over to Paul, and he will talk how this impacts specifically the seasonal